Okay, so derailleurs and a little bit on disc brakes. Derailleurs, rear derailleurs are much more standard. You know, there's SRAM rear derailleurs and Shimano rear derailleurs are a little different in ways, but they all basically work the same. And there are 4 things that can go out of whack on rear derailleurs. Okay? These 4 things are the derailleur alignment, the cable tension, the limit screws, and the gap. The gap is my term, but I find it's more descriptive than, there's something called the B adjustment screw is what Shimano calls it, but what you're adjusting is the gap. And I'm going to go over all 4 of those and tell you what are the symptoms that come up when something is going wrong with those. The most common one is the cable tension gets a little bit slack. Sometimes I've seen cables get a little bit too tight, and I'm not quite sure why, but so it's those little barrel adjusters on the cable that loosen or slacken the cable. Now, so if you've got the case of generally it's that you're trying to downshift, and it used to downshift very smartly, and now it downshifts with a lot of fuss. That means the cable is getting slack. You need to tension the cable, and I can wave my hands over what you need to do to tension the cable. You turn the barrel adjuster in the correct direction to tension the cable, but you know what I'm really going to tell you is what you need to know is my phone number. If you're noticing this problem, that it is having trouble downshifting, and for most derailleurs, most, not all, but most, pulling the cable is what downshifts you. Pulling the cable is what gets you to that hill climbing gear, where you're pedaling a little bit faster and it's easier to pedal the bike. And if it's slow to do that, in all the gears, it's the cable tension. Give me a call and I will talk you through it. It's trivially easy to do, but you know, I can tell you, you're basically turning this little thing counterclockwise to tension it, but you know, counterclockwise looking from which direction? Counterclockwise, you know, are we up on sometimes the adjuster is on the derailleur, sometimes the adjuster is on the shifter, sometimes the adjuster is on the cable. And it can be kind of hard to say what's clockwise and what's counterclockwise. Give me a call. But that is common, particularly with brand new bikes. It's not so much that the cable has stretched, it's that the housing, this hose that it goes through, has compressed. Or in the long term, the housing starts to wear out, and the sheathing around it starts to wear away. So it's not uncommon, and once you get the hang of doing that, it's very quick to do. If you've got an adjuster on the shifter, you can be tuning your shifting while you ride your bike, and that's sometimes a good time to do it if there's not too much traffic around. Okay? Second most common problem we see is the limit screws. That's these 2 little screws here. There are 2 screws side by side. If you got good eyesight, you can see one is marked H and one is marked L. Sometimes the best way to see these things that are kind of molded in relief on these black plastic parts is to shine a light crossways over it. So shining the light straight at it doesn't show up the letters as much as shining the light across them. And you'll see that H and that L. And that's high gears and low gears. Now, some people have trouble keeping which are the high gears and the low gears apart. You know after a while that the big cogs are your low gears and the small cogs are your high gears. Easy for people to get that confused. But you know there's a problem with the limit screws when all the gears basically shift just fine, except there's a problem with the last ones. Like either it won't shift into your lowest gear, or it shifts all the way over the lowest gear and falls off. And that can happen on both sides. And that's the limit screws. It's like the margins on a typewriter. It adjusts how far that derailleur can go from side to side. If the low limit screw is too tight, it won't make it onto the low one. It hits that screw and stops.
What's a typewriter?
Yeah, no kidding. You gotta ask a Luddite like myself. The next question is, what's a Luddite? You know, well, I can tell you're not a Luddite. If the limit screw is too loose, the chain can go all the way over and fall off. That is a much more serious condition. And if your chain falls off the inside and jams up, you can actually damage your derailleur. You know, poof, there goes $85 worth of derailleur. So limit screws are something that we adjust when we set it up, and generally they're not going to drift off that much. The thing that's tricky for some people with limit screws is that these are adjustment screws. I'm going to turn this around so people can see it. I realize I've been standing with my back to you people in the shade most of the time. That's the problem with theater in the round. you've got these two screws back there, and oftentimes one is halfway backed out. And if you're thinking that all the bolts on these bikes need to be tight or something's wrong, you let your better half go and tune your bike for you, and they just tightened everything down as far as they can go, then suddenly you find that the rear derailleur won't shift. We see those sometimes. I always tell them the first thing you should do is call us. If there's a problem, you can take out your tools and deal with it yourself, but call us before you do, if you can, just so we can review with you what you need to know about this. Because what happens is the limit screws get turned in all the way, and as a result, it'll only move between the middle few gears, and it can't move beyond that because it's hitting the limit screw. So if the problem is just at the ends, it's the limit screw. Chain's falling off the outside, it's the limit screw. Or it won't go all the way, that's the limit screw. The gap screw is this one that sticks out here. We don't deal with it very much. It's one of those things that the mechanic sets it up, and hopefully they set it up right. It is an easy thing to overlook. It's even an easy thing for the mechanic to overlook. It's something that I'm visually checking when I check a builder's work, and I am actually often having to tell them, take the gap in. The gap is the distance between this top pulley of the derailleur and the cogs. And it should be as close as you can get away with without it affecting the shifting. Let me put this up in its lowest gear. So I'm going to turn this around, and you see that space there. That is a properly adjusted gap. Congratulations, Peter. You'd set up your trike well. It's pretty close. And if the gap is too big, the shifting gets slow.
Don't mind me.
Because the chain sort of there's so much space between the rollers that the chain can kind of flex its way over, and it won't when you shift the derailleur, you move the derailleur over, it should be pulling that chain off the sprocket and moving it. But if that's too far apart, sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes that can affect the shifting only in certain parts of the range. So you'll want to look at that, when you put it in the low gear and check the gap. And it should only be, a few millimeters distance. You really shouldn't have whole complete links of chain spanning between the cog set and the top pulley on that derailleur. So that's something to look at. And then the last thing with rear derailleurs is the alignment. And this is actually a sort of a physical structural damage thing, which, so the chain is running through those rollers, they're in a plane, and they should be in a plane with the cog that it's on. But what can happen is the derailleur can get twisted. It can get bent over. And it's this part of the frame here, which hangs down, that the derailleur attaches to. They specifically designed that so that it would bend. If there was suddenly force on the chain, the bike fell over, it got bumped while it was being shipped. Sometimes if the chain just hangs up and all your force of pedaling doesn't go into the wheel, it goes into the derailleur, it can bend that piece. And on steel frames like this was designed to bend. And on aluminum frames, you tend to have a replaceable piece that can be straightened out or else just replaced. Usually replacing it costs as much as straightening it out. But it's one of those things that to do it right, it takes special measuring tools where it's not a real precise procedure, but you got to have a measuring tool that can compare the plane of the derailleur hanger to the plane of the wheel so that they're parallel to each other. Now, you have a problem with your derailleur alignment if it shifts fine at one end of the range, like it shifts fine in your high gears, but sort of halfway through the range, something happens. Like you shift it one gear and it goes 2, or you shift it one gear and it doesn't move at all. And then after that, it shifts fine the rest of the way, except you're one gear off where you thought you were. The first thing you do is you start playing with the cable tension, and all you do is you move the problem around, and then you think that maybe there's more to it than just the cable tension. And you can tell, you can sight down and look at the derailleur either from above or from behind, and it'll usually be pretty obvious that it's bent. And you can deal with the problem on your own. You can stick a 5mm Allen wrench in there and honk that sucker over if you got to do it in a hurry. It's not real precise to do it that way, but it could work. Or you can just put up with the problem. As long as it's a consistent problem, put it up with it till you can get it to a mechanic who can work on it. It's one of those things that any bike mechanic ought to be able to work on it. Problem, as you know, with many shops is they don't often have a work stand that a trike can go on. But if they can get it up on a work stand, there's nothing trike or recumbent specific about this. It's just a regular old part. So I realize I just rattled a lot of information off at you there, and it's filed away in your head somewhere. The main things to remember is what the sort of symptoms are. And even if you don't remember that, all you got to remember is our phone number. Give us a call, and we will basically ask you the same questions you've been hearing me talking through. We'll identify the problem. We'll tell you if you can fix it and how you can fix it. And if you can, get it in and let us go over everything to make sure it's all right. Any questions about rear derailers while I'm standing up here? Oh, good. Oh, wait. Oh, well, darn.
Not a question, just a comment. You helped me fix one that I was struggling with. I was convinced that there was a problem with the alignment on the derailleur. Turned out the rear axle wasn't seating all the way down. So
yes, that's right, and that is something you want to check before. If the derailleur hanger alignment isn't right, that's true. If you just changed a flat tire and put your wheel back on, and you didn't put your wheel back on straight, you get the same problem. The wheel is not aligned with the derailleur. So that is something you want to check. And of course, the easy way to check that is sit down on the bike and open the quick release lever so that your weight presses the bike down onto the axle. Because what happened was you put the wheel back on when the bike was unweighted. The bike was probably upside down or something, or on its side, and it just didn't go in all the way straight. So yes, thank you. Before you start whacking your frame, make sure your wheel's in there straight. Any other questions before we take a few moments on disc brakes?